Hey, how's it going? I'm going to give a speech about engines, specifically two-stroke and four-stroke engines, and some of the uses, similarities, and differences between the two, um, and how they work, and why it's called a two-stroke versus a four-stroke. So, just kick things off, we'll start with four strokes. Um, what is a two-stroke use? Well, I guess first, why is it called a four-stroke? It's because there are four strokes involved with, I guess, each cycle. Let's call it a cycle. So like per each every time there's an explosion, there's four strokes involved. It's down, up for every one explosion. And then two stroke is two, up, down. So we'll get to that in a minute. So four stroke, they're very, I guess, very common engines. They are used in, at this point, pretty much all vehicles. There are some vehicles that have been made in the past that were two strokes. There's a reason there's only a few of them, and you probably haven't heard of it. But yeah, so four strokes, they're used in cars. They're at this point, they're pretty much used in everything, from vehicles all the way down to little small things. I mean, like dirt bikes, things of that variety. Everything that you can think of, there are four stroke options for it. Um, So yeah, let's take a little closer look at a four stroke and why it's called a four stroke. So I'm going to screen share a minute right here. Share this. Here we go. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not. I'm hoping you can, but maybe not. So we're looking at the first one here, all the way on the left. We have, so these are the four strokes that we're looking at here. All the way on the left, we have the intake stroke. So this is as the piston goes down. It is pulling in the air and fuel mixture through the intake valves. So that first one down is intake because it is taking in the fuel in the air. And then we have the compression stroke, is where it compresses all of that air and fuel that it sucked in. I guess let's go back to the intake stroke a minute. If you'll notice, there is the intake valve. It's in green over there in the top left corner. The intake valve is open. That's why the air and fuel is coming in, because it's open. So it's sucking it in. Once it's all the way, the piston is at the bottom of its stroke, that intake valve will close. And then we have the compression strokes. That's when the piston's coming back up. Both the valves are closed. It compresses all the air and fuel because you get a bigger explosion when things are compressed. You have higher volume of fuel and air in a smaller area, so it creates a bigger explosion. So then then everything is compressed. We go over to the next one, the power stroke, and that's when the explosion happens. The spark plug sparks, and it explodes. So it pushes the piston back down. Hence power stroke. That's what's making the power. And then we have the exhaust stroke. At this time, the exhaust valve will open. The piston will come back up, push all the exhaust out. Well, the exhaust valve will open. Piston comes up, pushes the exhaust out. The exhaust valve closes, and we go back over to intake. That would be the next thing that would happen after the exhaust stroke. So taking a little closer look at this here, you notice that there are valves on the cylinders. So two strokes and four strokes both have what are called heads that goes on top of the cylinder. So the sleeve that the piston is inside of at the top. So like, you got your cylinder, and then on top of that is heads. In a four-stroke head, there's a couple different ways of doing it. There's what's called a push rod motor. This is going to be like a Chevy V8. Like if you have a Chevy Silverado, you got 5.3. You're going to have a push rod motor. Basically, that means there's one cam. They're called cams. They have, the easiest way to explain it is they're like egg-shaped lobes on them. As that goes around, when you get to that taller portion, it will push on, I guess in the case of a push rod motor, it would push on the push rod, which is a rod that goes up next to the cylinder, pushes on a rocker. And when that, okay, let's see if you can see this here. When the push rod pushes on the rocker, we'll have this rocker be here, and then we have the valve over here. The push rod pushes like up on the rocker, and the other end is at that time pushing down on the valve, which would open it. Otherwise, there's just your standard overhead cam, which means the cam is just pushing directly on the valve. The lobe comes around, pushes it down. You can have dual overhead cams, which is one for the intake, one for exhaust, or just a single, in which case it does both, and then your valves end up being on a little bit of an angle. But yeah, anyway, there's heads on there, have cams. There's the intake is in the heads. The exhaust is generally outside of the cylinders. Well, I guess outside of the heads. Yeah, all the in and out and spark of the strokes is all being controlled by the heads. So that's kind of a closer look at 4-stroke cylinder heads. So those are the 4 strokes, hence the name 4-stroke. And that's kind of a brief explanation of how that works. Let's switch over here to 2 strokes. Well, also we'll get that in a minute actually. Here's 2 strokes. There's just the 2 strokes, the upstroke and the downstroke. So essentially, you want to think that it's simpler, but it's really not. But it kind of is, but it's not. It's confusing. So yeah, we just got here the upstroke, the piston comes up, explosion happens, piston goes back down. And then piston comes back up, another explosion, piston goes back down. Every time it goes up, it explodes, and every time, it just goes up and down. Every time it goes up and down, there's an explosion. Versus on a 4-stroke, it's got, here. If you start at the top, intake, compression, power, exhaust. This is just intake and exhaust, power, intake and exhaust. Yeah. So if you look at the diagram all the way on the left here, first you'll see kind of down in the bottom left corner, it says valve open. You see where that goes. There's a little valve. That is generally a reed valve. So it's 2 little flaps of like carbon fiber or fiberglass. If there's a force of air, I guess it would be the other way. It would be kind of like this. If it was in the left side of that, or the left portion there, it'd be like this. As air flows inward this way, these valves are going to open up as that flows this way. And then when it gets pressure back the other way, it's going to force them closed. So basically, as we saw on the 4-stroke here, all of the air and fuel, it's all above the cylinder. It's through the heads into the top. In a 2-stroke, it actually goes into the bottom, into the crank, underneath of the piston. So essentially how it works is when the piston goes up, the crankcase, which is this bottom portion, is sealed. Same deal with a 4-stroke, but that's different. There's all oil and stuff down there. On a 2-stroke, well, there's also that too. So let's go over that real quick. In a 4-stroke, the whole, all this up here, basically the combustion chamber where the explosion happens, there's no oil or nothing going on up there. It's all down in the bottom in the crankcase. There's oil down there to keep things lubricated and cooled. In a 2-stroke, you see the fuel mixture, which includes oil in a 2-stroke. That's why, if you, let's say we're talking about 2-stroke snowmobiles, if it sits in one spot and idles for a long time, you'll see all black in the snow because it's burning oil. Or you can smell 2-strokes too. Like if you go to a fair and you watch a dirt bike race, you can smell the 2-strokes. It's because it's burning oil. So in a 2-stroke, the fuel mixture comes into the bottom of the motor. So let's say, like this diagram is, the piston's at the top. As it comes up, it creates a vacuum, sucks the air fuel mixture in with the oil. The oil is lubricating everything that's happening down there, the crankcase, the rods, the piston, all that. It's lubricating it. when that piston comes back down, it creates a compression in the crankcase, which forces that valve closed, and then it'll have the transfer port, which is on the side here. It looks like a little handle almost. It's also on the left side. It forces your air-fuel mixture into the cylinder. And then the piston comes back up, which will come past that transfer port and will seal it off and create another suction. As it's going up, compressing on top, it's creating a suction on bottom, drawing more in. So when that, your spark happens, you have your explosion, and it's being forced back down. It's doing the same thing. It's forcing the exhaust out and the intake in at the same time. So it is less efficient that way, but you can do it with a lot less mass. It's a lot lighter weight. If you look, we were talking about heads before on the 4-stroke, right? We have the valves and all that. Well, there's no valves except I guess it would be generally a reed valve, but the valve on into the crankcase where the air-fuel mixture comes in, there's no valves for the exhaust. It's just out. So you can see the top of the transfer port is lower than the top of the exhaust port. So basically, it'll suck your air fuel mixture in. Piston comes up, it seals off the bottom while it's still pushing the rest of the exhaust out. You have your explosion, goes back down. It's creating a compression in the bottom, forcing more stuff on top, and then forcing the burn fuel of the exhaust out. And also, if you look, the head, there's no valves in the head. It's just a plate. It's just the top that holds the spark plug. That's it. And then also on a 2-stroke, they have what's called an expansion chamber in the exhaust. So basically, it's this large area where the exhaust gas will kind of go in there and bounce around, and it puts pressure back into the motor, so back into the exhaust port, which you'll see on the far right side of the diagram here. There's like these little black dots. That's supposed to be the exhaust. It's putting pressure back into the cylinder, have more compression when that piston goes up and seals. Has more air in there and more compression. Yes, you will be essentially forcing exhaust into your air fuel mixture, but that's okay. That's just how these things run. So, that's how that works. There's oil mixed into the fuel mixture on a 2-stroke to lubricate everything while it's running. And then here's just kind of comparison of sound and also power, I guess. 2-stroke, being that only has 2 strokes, it has twice the amount of explosions at a certain RPM. So let's just say that you're revving out. These are snowmobiles, so they generally run pretty high RPMs. We'll just call it 8,000 RPMs just for an easy number. Both of these sleds should be about the same RPM. You'll hear the 2-stroke has a much higher pitch sound because it has twice as much explosions as the 4-stroke. So this first will have the 2-stroke, and then second will be the 4-stroke, and you can kind of see the difference in power as well as sound. That you'll find that the 4-stroke has a much deeper sound because it's only having half the amount of explosion. So here's this video. The first one's 2-stroke, the second one's a 4-stroke. So you see it wasn't wheeling too much. It didn't really do a whole lot as it came up over the hill, but it was very like a high-pitched sound, similar to like a Formula One car, which those, yes, they're 4-strokes, but they rev just crazy high numbers, so it would essentially be the same kind of sound. So now here's the 4-stroke. So right off the bat, you can hear it's a much deeper sound. Personally, I think it sounds a lot cooler, but some people would say otherwise. You can see he's coming in a lot faster than that 2-stroke did, just because he has a lot more power and a lot more go. He's got so much power, he wheelied over the second little roller hill there. So I say that was pretty cool. Let's just watch that second one again just for kicks and giggles. I love snowmobiles. Snowmobiles are great. So yeah, that's kind of a run through of two strokes and four strokes and how they work. Um, so just kind of compare and contrast two strokes. They don't last as long. There's twice as much explosions. That's essentially twice the amount of stress on the motor. Obviously, it's not quite that bad, but you get the idea. But two strokes are a lot lighter, so they're more commonly used. That's why you don't really see them in cars, is they don't last long enough for to be used in a vehicle. So you basically only see them in things that aren't expected to run, 200,000 miles. You probably drive your car roughly that much, right? But a snowmobile, a dirt bike, a jet ski, you're not going to go that far. So that is where you would want to use a two-stroke because it's lighter. It can make more power sometimes on the same amount of size, I guess. And yeah, they're sometimes, no, there is a higher cost associated with operating a two-stroke because you have to have the oil and the gas versus in a four-stroke. Yeah, you have to have oil, but you just put it in, it works, and then once you've kind of your lifespan of your oil is over, you change the oil, and you just keep doing that. You just change it. It's not constantly being fed in and used up and going away. So four strokes, they're a lot heavier, but they're a lot easier to deal with. They last a lot longer. Um, so much better option for vehicle. Yes, there are four strokes in everything, including dirt bikes, snowmobiles, jet skis, all that, versus you pretty much only see two strokes in those toys, if you will, the snowmobiles, the jet skis, the dirt bikes. But yeah, there's the four stroke, let's call it technology, I guess, is definitely coming a long way, and so it's becoming better and better and lighter and lighter. But as the technology gets better, those things are also, because of using more expensive um, means of manufacturing and more expensive materials to get them down in weight and keep them reliable as they are. So yeah, that's kind of my speech on the difference between two strokes and four strokes. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Thank you.